Greetings to all C3RF members and friends across Canada, indeed around the world, and a special welcome to the folks at Veterans for Freedom on their dedicated streaming channels as they view this video summary of the C3RF update for 28 February 2025. The title of this update is Resume Play, and it kicks off by noting that Canada is at a crossroads when it contemplates a fork in the road with three options. Go with the Empire, go with America, or go on its own. It's not as though the nation can obfuscate, delay, or otherwise ropey-dope making a decision, as things are moving fast now that Trump has plunked himself down firmly in the Oval Office. The old ways of the liberal, rules-based international order that came into being on the heels of World War II are evaporating rapidly as his administration leaves Pax Americana behind. The United States no longer intends to play the world's policeman and demands that its allies cough up and pay their fair share. From trade to treaty arrangements, America is no longer willing to buy cooperation in a bid to prop up its own worldwide hegemony. It's America first now, and old allies can accept new terms or be locked out of its inner circle of trust. Lucky for us, our decision-making process is aided by a plethora of evidence, facts, and recent history as we seek a suitable course of action. In the case of the Empire option, for example, we see the burgeoning rules-based international order standing in as a replacement for our own colonial relationship with Great Britain. This new empire-vassal relationship sees Canada bending the knee before the rules and authority of international institutions, including primarily the United Nations and affiliated agencies like the World Health Organization. Accordingly, we gladly delegate substantial decision-making authority to these global enterprises and obligate ourselves to sovereignty-crushing initiatives like climate change, pandemic preparedness, and unconstrained migration. Unfortunately, the obligations fed out by our new international masters seem more slanted towards transferring wealth from the richer regions of the world to the so-called poor, as witnessed by Canada's struggles to meet net zero mandates in the face of unbounded use of carbon-saturated coal by China. The fact that the vast majority of Canadians are less than impressed with going the Empire route is made clear by their distaste for the Liberal government of the past 9 years. The government chose to heavily invest itself in all things global, including a woke Great Reset proposed by the World Economic Forum. Now, after related and disastrous pandemic, immigration, and fiscal policies that have given the nation declining life expectancy rates, social discord, and ravaging deficits, rank-and-file Canadians are in no mood to entertain a continued membership in the censorious empire. A case in point is C3RF member and military veteran of 23 years, Daniel Mahoney. He is deeply disturbed by the direction the country has taken under its current federal leadership and bemoans its attachment to, quote, the WEF, climate ideology, the World Court, and, of course, the thoroughly useless UN, unquote. Indeed, he is so dismayed that he intends to return his United Nations Disengagement Observer Force medal that he obtained in the Golden Heights in the early 1990s. This is not a hearty endorsement of the Empire course of action. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance would seem to share Dan's lack of enthusiasm for the New World Order. He made this more than evident during his recent speech at the Munich Security Conference when he stunned the crowd with a call to, quote, return to a more open and less authoritarian political style, unquote. Bureaucrats were aghast with Vance's admonition that it was the internal fissures that represented the greatest threat to the heretofore cradle of Western civilization. Forget about war in Ukraine and forget about the Russian bear. It was the European ruling class's ongoing efforts to wall itself off from its constituents that a new America under Trump could not support. Indeed, he flatly stated that, quote, there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guide your very own people, unquote. The message was clear. America would no longer be a Europe's ally if it chose to make enemies of its own voters. As the Trump administration turns away from the rules-based international order to reprise its standing as the exceptional land of the free and home of the brave, long-standing alliances and global institutions stand to collapse. Already there is talk of creating a European standing army to take the place of a NATO made toothless by an American departure. In the end, it would seem that Vance is telegraphing the emergence of a new multipolar world in which smaller players like Canada will need to scramble to establish new security arrangements. As noted in last week's update and the in-hot interview with analyst Julius Ruschel, Many Canadians are ignoring calls from the ruling class to demonize a newly isolationist America and rather are chomping at the bit to take Trump on with his entreaty to become the 51st state as Pax Americana recedes. This contingent is fully on board with embracing a Go With America option. The Go With America course of action, however, would be a little more difficult and time-consuming than President Trump would let on. The process of becoming a state is normally preceded by the acquisition of the Canada jurisdiction, Canada in this case, becoming a territory. Such an occurrence would need to be the subject of a treaty of cessation, purchase, or occupation supported by 2/3 of the U.S. Senate and then ratified by the Congress. Then the real work begins if statehood is sought, with the new territory providing proof that a majority of its residents wanted to proceed before it adopted a form of government and a constitution compliant with the U.S. Constitution. Both the U.S. House and Senate passed by majority vote a joint resolution accepting the territory as a state, and finally, the President of the United States signing the joint resolution, and the territory is acknowledged as a U.S. state. The latter process could take decades, as is the case with Puerto Rico now, and leaves the territory in question without having any meaningful representation in the U.S. halls of power in the interim. It would appear then that joining an offshore empire consumed by woke identity politics and disdainful of individual rights and freedoms is just not in the cards for everyday Canadians. Indeed, and as noted above, these same Canadians have been living under these conditions for the last 9 years, given the current government's infatuation with European Union and Chinese policies that crack down on citizens that dare to criticize woke narratives or step outside of a social credit system, respectively. Then again, when these same citizens look south to join the American juggernaut as the 51st state, they are confronted with a possibility of years, if not decades, of uncertainty and much diminished political power, both before and after statehood. Who's to say that America will not slip back into a Biden-style censorship regime like the one uncovered by the Twitter files? Obviously, Canada needs to seriously consider the go-your-own-way course of action. In judging the possibilities associated with a go-your-own-way option, a few benchmarks might prove useful. If one takes a strong and free maxim to heart, then the free factor might be assessed by an option's ability to satisfy core civil liberty requirements. In the Canadian sense, these can be captured by our own charter preamble and the fundamental rights outlined in its section 2. After all, the preamble that states that the nation is founded on the principles that, quote, recognize the supremacy of God and the rule of law, unquote, locks in moral standards derived from a higher authority unmoved by the hand of man. This is a critical understanding, as the authority involved deems the individual to be a sacrosanct entity deserving of equal treatment under the law. As for the fundamental rights, they are so designated as all other rights, both individual and collective, depend on them for their own existence. Using these core values as measuring sticks, we can posit that Canada, in the present day, fails to measure up. The fact that Canada's system of government's configured as it is with too much power afforded its privy councillors and political parties allows civil liberties to be overridden by the politics of the day. This will need to be addressed if Canada is to go its own way without falling into deep step with the offshore empires it seeks to distance itself from. Such adjustments have been proposed by Canada's last living First Minister responsible for patriating the Constitution of 1982, Brian Peckford, in his Magna Carta for Canada. As for a strong and independent Canada, free of any empire or overlord, the first half of the last century saw the nation making good on Sir Wilfrid Laurier's prediction that, quote, the 20th century shall be the century of Canada and Canadian development, unquote. Then, in the late 60s, it was as though the pause button was pressed and Canada changed course from being a wealth creator to become a wealth redistributor. The move from equal opportunity to equal outcomes resulted in, quote, massive deficit and debt accumulation, unquote, and a near debt and currency crisis in 1994. Hitting the resume button on a go-your-own-way Canada, given its tremendous resource base and strategic advantages, is better than playing second fiddle to an empire or an American minder. Is it time to turn Laurier's dream into a 21st century reality? In closing, a reminder to join us at CanadianCitizens.org, where you can see this update in its full glory, including all of the links to its cited documents. Simply go to the News tab at the top of the page and select C3RF Member Updates from its drop-down menu. Until next time, this is Russ Cooper signing off, wishing you and yours much happiness and freedom from C3RF.